First, how do you think this war against the Ukraine is likely to end?
Well, I think the Western powers, principally the United States, though it comes in the form, if you like, of an alliance with through NATO, have made clear that they will not tolerate and accept an outcome in which Ukraine is defeated by Russia. This is the first thing to anchor, because beyond that, I think everything else is radically uncertain. There are two possible scenarios here, I think, that could be mapped out, one of which is one in which the Ukrainian military continue to humiliate the Russian military. And at some point, the Russian military are really exhausted to the point where they have to retreat back to perhaps beyond the starting line from which they began, which would be back to the 2013 boundaries of Ukraine. This would be an extraordinary victory for Kyiv, and it would pose the questions of whether Moscow can live with that. And then we open up the possibility of scenarios of escalation, because it's very difficult to understand how Putin and his regime could tolerate the extraordinary loss of face that follows from that. I know there are people who say, well, they manipulate the entire media environment. They can just purvey whatever happens as a victory. That doesn't seem to me compelling as an account of how any totalitarian dictatorship I've studied ever worked. That wasn't how propaganda worked in the Nazi regime. You couldn't simply negate a defeat and turn it into a victory. That seems unrealistic to me. And if that's not the case, we have to worry about asymmetric escalation. In other words, a move into the realm of non-conventional warfare, chemicals, biological, or nuclear escalation, and that's a terrifying scenario. The other scenario is one in which Ukraine runs out of steam, and in the end, Russia is able to stabilize its position and perhaps defend the boundaries that it established in 2014, 2015. And that then becomes a scenario of an attritional struggle. If you listen to some American strategists, they're more hawkish and more cynical. They speak of this as an Afghanistan. And then the question, of course, is can the wider region and can the world economy live with the potential disruption of a prolonged slogging match in Ukraine? And this is a recipe for a humanitarian catastrophe, the collapse of Ukraine's economy, and permanent disruption to both energy and food markets, which will then ripple out through to the wider world. So to my mind, though the commitment of the West to ensuring Ukraine's non-defeat is cast iron at this point, and there's no way back for them either on that score, whether anyone really has a constructive vision of how we get to restabilization is an open question. And what I fear is certainly in Washington that the momentum is squarely behind the strategy, which basically is driving towards the defeat of Putin. And that is a strategy of very high risk, and we should be clear about that. You can understand the attraction and the appeal of that strategy, but you have to ask whether or not they have gamed out the variety of risks that arise from it.